Okay, welcome back. We are in early September 1852. We have past turn, and well, things are getting spicy. Before I kind of go through very small lines of text to report back, let's have a look at what's sitting in front of us. So we can see now that Plevna has fallen. We can see that without having to look at the report, though we will look at the report to drill in some detail. And we can also see that at Constanta, our allies, our valiant allies, make an appearance, and at an interesting moment, at an interesting location as well. A French force under the command of Marechal Jean-Baptiste Vaillant. I guess Marechal is probably his command, his rank, and he's in command of one army corps. He has two lieutenant generals, incidentally, but he's in command of one army corps, one brigade of marines, one division, one cavalry division, and one Senegal brigade, colonial brigade, also a Escadre de Ton, which I guess is a supply train. But also here is the Duke of Cambridge Corps, so there's a British corps there also, which gives that allied force a pretty nice combat value, even though it looks rather unorganised. But then, of course, it has just disembarked at Constanta. But it is in Constanta. It's kind of serving the role that we were holding Omar Pasha back to do, which is to basically close this off to the Russian force. Now we can see that the Russian force, if we look at the detail of the last sort of stage really of the siege of Plevna, day one, and by the looks of it, what was left of the garrison largely surrendered. And who can blame them? I mean, Christ, I thought that Plevna was going to fall back in July. We're now in early September, and it was a courageous stand. I mean, they inflicted something like 70,000 casualties in the Russian army, and we can see that the Russian army now, with the reserve folded in and with some probably very modest amount of trickle back, we can see that they're sitting at around 72,000 men, nearly 40,000 horses, 524 guns, and of course that was going up against 1,700 men, 32 guns. So it was written in the stars for Plevna, really. And yeah, I mean, their force doesn't look like it's in a bad state. I mean, they have suffered some horrendous losses, but we can see that they've had a little bit of trickle back. Now, trickle back is, of course, when we look at casualties in a battle, they experienced almost no casualties here. 307 men, 307 horses, so looks like a small cavalry force maybe received some grape shot or something. But these don't necessarily mean deaths. The casualties include wounded as well, and of course more men are wounded than die, but at this time even the walking wounded can die. It's eminently possible for someone to receive a very minor wound and die, but those that don't constitute trickle back. Those walking wounded that are casualties at the sort of point of contact, but they receive some very basic, very remedial treatment. They can then go back to join the force. And one of the reasons there's almost no trickle back, of course, is because at this time, if we look at the kind of service asset units, we have pioneers, engineers, provosts. We do not have field hospitals at this stage. Of course, that is an innovation of this war, and actually that is something that will become available to us, the French, the British, and the Russians in the next few years. And that does sort of change the game in terms of trickle back. It means that you can sustain fairly heavy losses, fall back, and within a fortnight or so, a portion of that force returns to the ranks, sort of thing, returns to the colours. But we now have a Russian force, 70-odd thousand, and compared to our force, 95,000, 20,000 horse, just under 506 guns. I fancy my chances. Early September, weather's still decent. Plevna, nice flat ground for an offensive. And if not now, then when? Constanta is held by an allied force. Of course, that force could re-embark. We don't know what the allied intentions are. They're not going to tell us. They might very well re-embark and make a landing in Sevastopol or something. But while they're there, I think we maybe utilise this moment. I think the moment has arrived. It will be a big battle. We hold a bit of a manpower advantage. Our force has largely recovered cohesion and organisation. And the Russian army, we should bear in mind, is still under the command of Paskovich. And that might be a mystery to someone, because Paskovich has dropped the ball repeatedly since the first Adrianople. It's unbelievable how poorly he has done. But there's a good reason why he's still in command. It's because the only other staff commanders they have in the theatre are junior to him. They are either lieutenant generals or major generals, and he is a 3-star general. He's the only 3-star general. So it doesn't matter how much his seniority is affected. It doesn't matter how much he's blamed for defeats. If that's all they have, and they're not in a position to promote any of these 2-star generals, then QED Paskovich will continue to be the commander. And Paskovich is not a very balanced commander. He's very aggressive. He's a very effective commander on the offense, actually, by any standard. But he's not a very good defensive commander. He doesn't arrange his forces very effectively for any kind of defensive war. Omar Pasha is a bit more balanced. These kind of figures do change. I mean, the strategic value really just represents, it represents two things. One, the likelihood of your commander being activated, and also the movement qualities of your force. A commander that is leading a force that has a high strategic value will move much more effectively and will lose less cohesion and organization whilst moving. Offensive and defensive are fairly self-explanatory. All of these figures are subject to change. They change all the time. And of course, they're not the only determining thing. I mean, there's lots of other things like the nature of the terrain, crossing rivers, weather, so on and so forth. Seniority reflects kind of like your pecking order, really, or the pecking order of that officer within their ranking structure. Rank will always trump everything. But if it were the case that all of these commanders were 3-star generals, the general that's in command, and from left to right, the most senior officer will be to the left. And seniority, as I say, it reflects the kind of pecking order. A really good concrete example of this is if we look at the Ottoman fleet, we actually have 2 full admirals, one serving as a kind of support role, as an advisor, as a staff planner. But we can see that Mustafa Pasha, a 3-star admiral, has a seniority of 7. Counterintuitively, the lower the figure with regard to seniority, the higher, if you like, the higher they are in the pecking order. It reflects their esteem within the aristocracy, the ruling class, the kind of bourgeoisie, depending on whatever state you're playing. And we can see so Mustafa Pasha he's a full admiral. Mushavir Pasha is also a full admiral. He's not a rear admiral or anything like that. He has a slightly poorer seniority. As such, command force to Mustafa Pasha, Mushavir, is in a supporting and advisory role. So that's sort of how it works. And that's important because if it is the case, for example, that you only have 3-star generals, if these have all been promoted, or we only have 2-star generals, it's important because you can have a commander that is less effective, but he's just has a greater seniority because of his esteem, length of service. So a concrete example is Omar Pasha, newly promoted. When he was promoted, I thought it would be the case because he had a high level of seniority, that seniority would carry over to his new rank. That's not the case. His seniority declined because he became a 3-star general. Now, despite the fact that he's much more capable than Rita Pasha is more senior, of course. He has a poorer strategic value. He has poorer overall combat values. He's not a very capable commander, but he has been a 3-star general for many years, so he's got very good connections, and probably has the ear of the Sultan and this sort of thing. Nevertheless, despite all of that, of course, we do know that he's less capable. He keeps a command. He's going to be sent to the east, but we know that he's not the kind of general we want in the field doing the dirty business of fighting a war with Russia. So that's fairly broadly, anyway, how this kind of functions, how this kind of system works. And it's quite good. It's quite rich and textured, and again, it's variable. It changes. You can have commanders that are really forged in the kind of white heat of warfare. Commanders that maybe start the war as not necessarily terribly capable. I mean, Omar Pasha, at the beginning of this war, had pretty good potential, but he wasn't any kind of staggering commander. He had he was well placed. He's a good aggressive strategist and this sort of thing, a strong disciplinarian. So he's well placed to win victories as a junior lieutenant general, which he did, and that has impacted his values and also his rank ultimately. It can be a funny business. In a really large battle, you can win a large battle, but if one of these corps commanders suffer really heavy casualties, if their corps is utterly mauled, you can have kind of conflicting reports. On the one hand, the commander of the battle, Omar Pasha, maybe receive congratulations. Congratulations is, public recognition that they've done something remarkable. It's sort of, I suppose, like being mentioned in dispatches or something like that. Conversely, one of his junior officers whose corps may have been utterly mauled. Say, for example, if Khurshid Pasha does some kind of ill-advised cavalry charge, his force gets decimated, but nevertheless, the other guys carry the day. He could be blamed for a defeat, even though he was a part of a colossal and astonishing victory. On that basis, his kind of political currency sinks, his seniority declines, and so on and so forth. But on a long enough timeline, based on enough sustained action, more capable commanders will become more senior over time. They will be acknowledged and recognized because they will exercise better judgment in the heat of battle. So over a period of time, you'll generally see more capable commanders climb the ranks and this sort of thing, because warfare is much more meritocratic than peacetime armies can sort of allow for. But peacetime armies, people with political connections and such, are promoted. But so here we are on the Western Front. We'll revisit the Western Front, and let's have a look at what else is happening. So Plevna's fallen. The Allies have landed at Constanta. This frees up Omar Pasha to do what? That's the question, and we'll go back to that in a moment. On the Eastern Front, then, we can see a development. Vorontsov's army, having kind of moved around and seemingly in circles in the southern Caucasus, besieged Kars, has now entered Van. It's a little bit concerning, this. I know that the cavalry brigade is just a screening force. Obviously, it's falling back. It's doing what it's meant to do. Wasn't even engaged. And we have some Bashi Bazouks, very small brigade-sized forces of irregular kind of paramilitaries, I suppose, in Hakkari and Bitlis, screening the Russian army, which has moved into Van. Now, if the Russian army presses south, it's a little bit worrying. This is a sort of open game for them. But they can't really move too far because they're dependent on the depot at Erevan. And the further south they move to Hakkari, for example, this will begin to expose them, their kind of their depot at Erevan to our force. Now we're going to start looking at getting some force concentration going on the east and preparing a counter to this move. I suspect that Vorontsov is a little bit like the Russia's version of Rita Pasha. The fact that he's continuously pulled back and not done very much suggests that he's probably not activated very much. I know that in real life he was very elderly by this time. I think he was in his 70s. I think he was a kind of a general even in the Napoleonic era, or maybe a junior officer in the Napoleonic era. But let's have a look at Rita Pasha. So his command is being assembled. We're starting to get kind of HQ staff kind of assembled for this call, and we're getting the sort of last gun deliveries. We're hoping that probably in the next sort of two weeks to a month that this force will be complete. Rita Pasha then can... What we're actually going to do is we're not going to march Rita Pasha with this force through the mountains. It's going to take an eternity. And we're going to use something that we haven't used yet, which is our transport force. Now, it has a transport capacity of 40. If we hover over looking at our pop-up, and we won't have enough riverine points to move an army corps. An army corps is a fairly considerable force. Weight 48. Damn, that is really frustrating. That is a shame. So that force is actually too large. Damn and blast. Yeah, I was hoping to use the transport squadron, maybe lift it from Sinop to the harbour at Batumi, where Hussein Avni is based, and was rather thinking on my feet there. But that's not on the cards. I didn't realise a militia corps was 48. I thought it'd be lighter than that. So we would need to build another transport squadron, which would take time, and it would take longer to build another transport squadron. It's something like river transport. 120 days. It's just not on the cards, really. Yeah, I mean, long term, we obviously do need to start looking at developing a kind of heavy lift capacity, because we don't have enough riverine transports to move large forces, and until it's going to be many years before we start developing railroads in the kind of eastern region. It's very mountainous. It's very poorly developed. Getting some heavy lift capacity might be the basis really for kind of moving forces from the interior to the frontier, and those forces will be useful after anyway. Of course, we have a fairly sprawling kind of empire, so it's something that we need to look at long term. But the idea is, once this force is complete, kind of fabrication is complete. It looks like all the training is complete with the kind of the loins of the army, if you like, the kind of the various infantry regiments are in place. It's just the kind of the finishing touches really. Once that force is complete, we're going to begin to move that force to Batumi, and we're going to be looking to get some kind of force concentration. I think what we're going to do as well, actually, is we're going to move Abdi Pasha to the north, because it's going to take him a bit of time, 21 days, and yeah, begin to kind of achieve force concentration. And we'll have a 3-star general in place. We're going to have service asset units. We're going to have supply trains in place. So we're going to be in a position to kind of counter this. I think also if we pull back from Kars, it's likely it's going to invite Vorontsov to the north, which is sort of where we want him, really. That said, all of this depends, of course, on having Riza Pasha ever being prepared to engage in offensive manoeuvres. But at the very least, it will sort of keep them away from northern Iraq. There's, you know, a mountain range here. Weather's going to start getting tricky in a month or so. You're going to start looking at heavy rainfall, and the mountains are going to be looking at snow, possibly blizzards. You're really hard pressed to large and move force through mountain passes in such weather without sustaining heavy casualties anyway. We have sustained another small defeat. Now, it is going to be a feature of both the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire that it's something that we really share with the Russians, actually, that in times of war, you know, both of our empires, perhaps more so we're a patchwork of kind of petty sort of ethno-religious tensions and this sort of thing, various groups that have different kind of agendas, and they will be looking to kind of capitalize on anything. Bear in mind that the Ottoman Empire, the same with Russia, we don't just get to lose a war and then carry on business as usual the next day. Even if we lose the territory, if national morale sinks and we start suffering heavy defeats, this will be felt internally. We'll be looking, depending on the scale of the defeat in a war, we could be looking at massive insurgencies, national-sized rebellions, and this sort of thing. And we can see some kind of some pressures beginning to emerge in the exterior of the empire, in this case the interior of Libya, or Cyrenaica. We sent a small cavalry squadron to the south because we did receive reports that there was a kind of disputed ownership issue going on in Amal, in the kind of the deserts of Cyrenaica. This cavalry scouting force was actually quite badly mauled. It's a very small force. We suffered 460 casualties, inflicted 500. The purpose of it was really to reconnoitre the interior. We can see these are Senussi raiders. They've done a pretty good job to throw back a regular cavalry brigade, but we're going to start beginning to march an infantry brigade south. It's going to take 19 days. Obviously, you know, marching infantry brigades into the interior is not really the sort of thing we want to be doing, but it's just to buy time, really. Keep this force occupied, attrition it down, wear it out. In the last analysis, we can replace our losses fairly readily. It's quite likely insurgents will struggle a little bit to do that. We need to keep an eye on that, though. The interior of Libya. These kind of things can very quickly spread and spiral out of control. What starts off as a little group of Senussi raiders, well, we saw this, didn't we? You know, a couple of years ago in sort of in Aden. You know, I mean, what started off really as very, very small kind of insurgents and this sort of thing have morphed into something bigger, and it's an opportune moment actually to have a quick look at Aden. We can now see that they still have a command in Hadramaut, but a small force has hooked round now and is in Hodeidah. It's besieging the colonial fort there, and yeah, I mean, we can't allow that situation to kind of continue. We do have a fairly considerable force in Sana'a. We have got a force in place to defend the colonial fort there, so let's make a move. It's going to take 21 days. It's a shame. I wonder what would happen if we detached the cavalry division and just move the cavalry division. 18 days, not much different. I think that's going to be based on the weather. Increasingly, the weather's going to start getting dicier. That said, looking at these territories, there's no real indication here that there's serious weather problems. But anyway, 21 days is fine. Again, it's really just kind of like here. I think it's going to be a case of kind of shifting weight from foot to foot, really, to buy time. That's all we're really doing here. You know, this force is not going to pacify this region. It's just a defensive kind of force to keep the insurgents at bay from those areas that we've kind of exploited. We have some economic presence. We've got trade posts. We've got, you know, we're protecting our kind of missions and this sort of thing. And these trade posts are providing us with a nice trickle of opium and coffee, which is good for domestic market sales. It's something that always kind of always offers nice returns. The only other thing military that I wanted to report on was that it looks like something was spotted by our defensive fortresses in Gallipoli and Kanakkale, and it looks like a Russian transport has managed to pass through the Bosporus, which is interesting. It looks like the British are not far behind him, and this British fleet is carrying additional troops, Indian Service Corps, Artillery Brigade by the looks of it, a West Indian Colonial Regiment, and a West African Corps. So it looks like a mixed force of kind of colonials. My thinking is we're going to try and provide these guys with a bit of security as they pass through the Bosporus, especially since we have spotted Russian forces. It looks like the Russian forces we spotted were themselves transports, but we'll just keep a presence in the Bosporus. We want to keep this closed off really, and we're not completely supplied, but organisation and cohesion of the ship's crews looks good actually, so they're in a position to do that. Now, economically, I've already kind of organised our administration. Everything is sort of set to ensure that any surpluses, everything's set to basically meet domestic demand. Any surpluses are set for export. We're still pressing hard for manufactured goods. In terms of North Germany and Scandinavia, I think we're looking to pay a premium because competition is basically outstripping supply, and we don't have a commercial agreement with any of these countries really. I think we're going to pop over to Chesapeake and we'll look to actually offer a premium for manufactured goods, because manufactured goods is sitting fairly low. It's at 27. We do want anything that we can get, and unfortunately neither the British or the French are offering manufactured goods, and that is something that I should report. Yeah, we now have a commercial agreement with France as well as Britain, and this is really, really excellent news. I mean, two substantial economies are looking to favour us over anyone else. Neither of these countries have commercial agreements with anyone else. So this is going to guarantee sustained exports for the Ottoman Empire. If anything these countries want, anything that they're looking to import with us, tobacco, wheat, they will look to import from us before anyone else, and that's going to provide a really, really strong, sort of a strong stimulant to economic growth. So that's good news. Domestic market sales, I think they're sitting about sort of 256, shifting 67 units of goods, 53 exported for a value of 136. And good balance of trade this turn, but that's really because of the choking off really of manufactured goods on the international market. It's just demand is really high at the moment, and we're struggling to get our mitts. And we do want to stockpile manufactured goods. We're slackening off on steel imports now because steel imports, our steel stockpiles quite high. We don't really consume any steel in our economy because we're kind of a pre-industrial society. Our craftsmen actually produce a very small amount of steel anyway, so our economy does actually generate a very small amount of steel, and there's a small amount of coal being produced in our economy also, and iron and this kind of thing, but this is kind of from the kind of guilds really. It's not a significant part of even that part of the economy, but anyway, we don't need to kind of increase our stockpile any further. I think the next move is clear, isn't it really? The Allies are basically guarding the bottleneck. They're there. The hope is they stay. Their organisation looks quite poor, but their combat value is quite good. And I can't imagine the Russians are going to try and move north to Constanta to confront, us and a Franco-British force combined. I mean, they'll absolutely doom them. My thinking is they're going to move towards Varna or Romelia. Well, they might sit tight, but I think this is our moment, isn't it? 7 days march. Set to an offensive posture, set to all-out attack. The difference between all-out attack and sustained attack is that all-out attack, if attack seems to falter in a particular area, the commander will continue to press the attack. This is a much more risky form of attack because it can result in catastrophic losses. But if the enemy, for example, is set to sort of like a conservative defence or a sustained defence, once their morale and their organisation becomes low enough, they will pull back. We'll never really pull back based on morale and cohesion. We'll always force the attack. We'll always force the issue. I don't always do this, but in this case, I think it's worth doing. I tend to try and ensure our commanders are aggressive as possible. In the last analysis, losses can be, they can be replaced. It can result in catastrophic defeats. Don't get me wrong. It can result in entire army corps being annihilated. So it's a very, very risky form of attack, and if the enemy is set to hold at all costs, what you're looking at is an absolute bloodbath. The result of attack at all costs, an all-out attack, is that generally battles are much more bloody. They're much more bloody, much more severe, much more zero-sum. Sustained attacks is the sort of default behaviour. The commander will press the attack, will exercise a little bit of judgment. If it looks like the day isn't going to us, he will break off. He'll look to preserve his force, but it will be considered a defeat because he will leave the field. What I tend to use is I try and use sustained attack. I try and encourage our commanders to be as aggressive as possible earlier on in their career, to enable them to kind of develop their skill sets a little bit more. When they develop their skill sets, because there's a little bit of tutelage here, like okay, Omar Pasha's he's been an excellent kind of lieutenant general, but this is really early in his career as an officer. You've got to remember that this guy is actually in his late 40s, early 50s at this time. I think he dies in the 1870s, and he's not old when he dies. I think he's 60 something when he dies. So he's a pretty young sort of commander, fairly capable. But I think early on we want to kind of encourage him to be as aggressive as possible. And once we really develop him and sort of nurture and kind of cultivate his statistics a little bit, we'll use sustained attack much more, allow him to exercise judgment much more, and he's much more likely to carry the day anyway. So that's the kind of basis behind this thinking. But also, look, this is flat ground. We're going up against Paskovich, who is a dreadful defensive commander with a track record of abysmal failure. And I think on that basis we're going to come off really well. We're going to sustain some cohesion loss. It's only 7 days. It's not too bad. But I fancy it. The Imperial fleet is being sorted into the Bosporus. We have set up the Imperial fleet to naval interception, to offensive posture, sustained attack. I can't see that we're going to engage any large forces in the Bosporus. The sustained attack is sufficient. We're going to keep the raiding fleet back in Smyrna for the time being, just to continue sort of cohesion, recovery, and organisation, and so on and so forth. Now, this feels like too much of a cliffhanger because this is really our first big offensive battle, going up against a force of similar size, slightly smaller. They may experience some further trickle back, let's be clear. In the next fortnight, they might get another 5,000-10,000 of those wounded, that if not dead yet, from small grazes having turned into infections that kill them. They still might get a little bit of trickle back, so they might another 5,000 men. So I'm going to pass turn, and I'm not going to make you wait to another. I don't think I could wait for another day. It'll be so. I'll pass turn, and we'll experience the outcome together. But it'll be an exciting one. And I wonder where they would fall back to as well. I mean, if we engage them in Plevna and give them an absolute hiding, an absolute sort of drubbing, where do they fall back to? They can fall back, it's not like 20th century warfare. I mean, Rumelia's open. Paskovich can just fall back into Rumelia. He can actually fall back into Sofia. He won't be able to take the city because it's a fortress. The Bashi bazooks they're a screening force. They'll just simply fall back. They'll peel off. So he can fall back into any region. He might even fall back into Constanta. That would be ideal because, of course, the hope here is, depending on the posture of the British and the French, if he experiences a defeat here, and it's a significant enough defeat, if he falls back into Constanta, I mean, he's going to have a really bad fortnight, isn't he? So we'll see what happens anyway. It'll be an interesting. It's going to be an interesting fortnight. Sometimes these things can be anticlimactic, of course. We move into Plevna, he moves south into Rumelia, we take the fortress. We're not set to assault. Now, the reason being is we have to be a little bit careful here. He might peel an army corps or two into the fortress, and it could get really, really messy for us. We might defeat them in the field and then suffer a catastrophic defeat assaulting the fortress. We don't know what state this fortress is in, whether the Russians have managed to conduct repairs on the fortress. And the idea is, if we can defeat him convincingly in the field and he falls back into the fortress, that is ideal, because then we've got a massive Russian army completely sealed off in a massive fortress. And I think that's what happened to the French in the 1870s, or the 1870 war with Prussia. Louis Napoleon III, his army took refuge in the fortress. I think it was at Strasbourg or Metz, and he was surrounded. The Prussians didn't really have to do much. They just kind of sat outside, shelled the fortress, and that was game over for France. An absolute kind of humiliation, but yeah, we'll see what happens. It may be anticlimactic, but I'm rather excited for this, and it could be a defeat. Look, it could be a defeat. I mean, he's a pretty poor defensive commander, but we don't know. I don't know what his junior staff are like, really. None of them have really had an opportunity to shine because they've been commanded by him. So they've probably all experienced defeat after defeat. Some of them may have been congratulated. You know, even in a big defeat, if a kind of lieutenant general does rather well, maybe he manages to preserve a force while the other forces are kind of destroyed. Maybe he preserves his core, he does quite well, and in some kind of, you know, the microcosm of the battle sort of thing, and he gets congratulated. And on that basis, perhaps one of his lieutenant generals are promoted. But and I think if they are, they would fairly quickly replace him. I can't imagine his seniority is very high. But we'll see. It would have been staggering for the Russians to have been defeated to this extent in this war, however, if this had happened. Because, I mean, the Russians were defeated in real life by the Ottomans in the Balkans when the Russians invaded, but not quite on this scale. You have got to bear in mind that we're in 52. In 1848, the Russians intervened to help the Austrians, the Habsburgs, restore order in the Hungarian Revolution. They were the kind of force of reaction, you know. In the 1820s, just after the auspicious incident, you know, the Russians caught us with our pants completely down and gave us an absolute drubbing in the last war that we fought with them in the 1820s. I mean, they pretty much just marched to Adrianople, besieged and stormed the fortress, and then sat outside Constantinople and dictated terms to us. And 10 years before that, of course, Russia was instrumental in the defeat of Napoleonic France, you know, which had been invincible, militarily invincible, based on the military corps system, the organised staff command system, and also, of course, the effectiveness, the superlative kind of command of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was also the kind of subjective factor. He was also a very good kind of individual commander, but really it's the tool set that he had access to, which was important in his kind of earlier victories. You sort of get the impression that as his opponents kind of imitated and developed forces that were similar to France's army, then he lost an edge, sort of with each year that passed by. But yeah, I mean, this was to think that Russia went from that, you know, to being devastated, really. I mean, if this force is destroyed, it would be such a devastating defeat for Russia. It really would. And it would be bewildering for the Russian ruling class, the aristocracy and the chattering classes in Moscow and St. Petersburg, to consider that they had been defeated, and not really defeated by the British or French either, but defeated by us. But we also have to keep a sense of proportion, I think, because even though the British and the French haven't really done very much up to now, and let's be clear, they've only just landed a force. They're not doing anything with it, as far as we know. They might even re-embark it. That would be irritating as hell. If they re-embark their force, the Russians are defeated at Plevna, or the Russians just disengage at Plevna. They suffer 4,000 casualties, disengage, somehow, through some alchemy of maneuver, manage to fall back into Constanta. I mean, okay, look, it's still a victory. We'll retake the fortress. We've defended the kind of Balkan Peninsula, but it wouldn't be the kind of, the catastrophe that we're looking to inflict on the Russians. But that would be probably the worst case scenario, I think, for this fortnight, for this term. But yeah, it would seem inconceivable to Russia that they'd be so defeated. But I think the reason we need to keep a sense of proportion is, even though the British and the French haven't done very much, the mere fact that the British and the French are at war with the Russians has, here we go, day 2. Oh, God, it's going to be day 7, isn't it? Day 7 or 8. The mere fact that the British and the French are kind of in the game, so to speak. Oh, what has happened? It looks like the Russians have not engaged us. Day 8. Okay, it's a mixed force. There's some British commanders there. Nicholas Penny, Duke of Cambridge, 100,000 men. Where is that? Constanta. Does that mean that Omar Pasha's move has somehow been interrupted? It looks like the Russians partially plunged north into Constanta. It's getting complex. It looks like a force has gone south towards Rumelia. Okay, that's a reasonably sizable kind of battle. Yeah, it looks like the Russians are kind of fanned out. It's really, really peculiar move. I didn't really see this. I didn't imagine this would happen. I mean, it's a victory. Out of 13,000 men, 7,000 casualties. That's half their force. You know, I'll take it. But it's in the oddest sort of way as well. This is guarantees what? A defeat in detail. I mean, if I mean, 6,000. Well, it's yeah, 6,000 prisoners, 5,000 casualties. So a portion of their force, it looks like one of the army corps. It's probably headed north, thinking they're going to open up a corridor to Odessa. Hasn't panned out. But it does look like all of that has rather disrupted Omar Pasha's move towards Plevna, which has not come off. Day 15, that's it. I mean, it's a string of victories for us. It's not the single big, colossal battle we were hoping for. But let's have a look at the kind of layout of the land. It does look on the surface of it a little bit as though Omar Pasha's isolated. That's fine, though. He's got a lot of supplies. He's got 3 supply trains. We have maritime access to the port at Constanta, so we could keep him supplied. And in any case, I think we're going to comfortably open up a corridor to Adrianople. But yeah, it looks like the Russians are trying to play with the position as much as they can, give themselves an elbow room. Maybe they calculated that we were going to head south towards Adrianople because, you know, Adrianople and Constantinople is kind of open. But they wouldn't have been able to force either of those fortresses. I mean, look how long it took them to take Plevna. And Adrianople and Constantinople especially are much more considerable fortresses than Plevna. They are larger fortresses. They have a larger garrison. So yeah, it looks like the Balkans has kind of developed into a bit of a Gordian knot. Let's have a look. Pashkovich still sits comfortably in Plevna for whatever reason. Omar Pasha didn't move. I did organise Omar Pasha to move. It's only 3 days now. That's interesting. Okay, he's covered some of the distance somehow. Anyway, a substantial Russian force is still there with an 11% penalty, so it's a smaller force. Portion of the force is broken off and is besieging Sofia. It looks like they took Varna. Duke of Cambridge is there. Yeah, they took Varna, but sure enough. French force looks like it re-embarked and landed in Rumelia, as far as I can see. Yeah, a pretty kind of wild and complex turn. I don't know what Russian force it looks like. Let's have a look. Yeah, there's no other forces here, so it appears as though the Russians maybe sent a force to Varna. Maybe they defeated the British force. They seem to have taken Varna. There's a British force there, but for whatever reason, it's not able to take the town back. It seems like the Russian commanders split into 2 main groups, army-sized groups. One commanded by Dmitry Osten-Sakin, and the other commanded by Paskovich. Well, I think we know what we need to do next anyway. I think we're set to assault, and we'll pass right through 10 days. And yeah, we'll look to engage the entire Russian force. Okay. Yeah, and things are getting interesting in the east as well. So Vorontsov, who's been the most cautious commander imaginable, has now decided to penetrate quite deep into our territory in the east. And another Russian force has landed. It looks like a cavalry division supported by a line brigade, maybe some kind of infantry brigade, is besieging Trabzon. That's not going to be enough to take Trabzon, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, a garrison at Trabzon is 42,000 men, so I think that's fairly secure, fairly safe. Rita Pasha, still waiting for his damn guns. I mean, that Russian force could move into Diyarbakir, I think. Yeah, I mean, this does have a small garrison. It will have a kind of the difficult thing here is this does have a small depot, and once they take this depot, that does provide them with a little bit of freedom in terms of what to do. We've got to be a little bit careful here. We don't want them kind of separating the metropole of our empire, if you like, from our possessions in the Middle East. So we need to give this some thought. We could even begin the construction of a fortress right away there, and it would offer some. It would mean that they wouldn't be able to take that right away. Furthermore, that force is, their force is rather strung out now. We could maybe move a force into Van. Was it 9 days of then? Otherwise, it was about 23 days away from moving into Van. We can move the Bashi Bazooks back there at least anyway. Interesting. Yeah, interesting turn. Not quite the kind of... I was looking for that kind of, clean kind of broadsword stroke that would kind of solve all problems in one fell swoop. That's not what's happened, but that's okay. I don't think there's, nothing very bad has happened. There's no real prospect of Sofia falling, I don't think, for a while. Sofia is a fortress pretty much on the same sort of scan as Plevna. It's a pretty decent fortress. What have we got there? 28,000 men. The Russians won't be able to storm that, I don't think. I mean, it's a fortress that's actually in construction. We began the construction of this fortress not that long ago, but it's enough to basically provide some benefit to a garrison force there. British force then has landed in Salonika. Well, I think if the Russians are going to be catastrophically kind of defeated in the Balkan Peninsula, it's not going to be until kind of it's been postponed, to put it that way. Yeah, I think what we'll do, I'll leave it there, and I think next turn I can look through the reports, provide a more kind of bit of structured feedback on this, and we can kind of drill into some of the detail, because it is a game where the kind of devil is very much in the detail. So we can see here some congratulations. This actually kind of touches back to what we're talking about. Omar Pasha, he's congratulated. I mean, the last analysis, obviously, his attempt to move into Plevna was disrupted by the fact that a large force was falling into Constanta, and they were looking, obviously, to kind of develop their position towards Sofia, but also open up a corridor. And it looks like they were moving a force towards Varna. I think they suspected we were going to be pressing south to be cautious and set up a position here in Adrianople. But, we didn't do that. And I think they probably thought they were going to get a corridor back in Constanta. That didn't come to pass. And, congratulations are in order across the board. Omar Pasha, Abba Pasha, Zaif, Mustafa, Khurshid, Abdul Karim. I mean, it's a good showing in the last analysis. Again, we'll drill into the details and look at the combined casualties of these actions. It looks like, one national morale point going to one of those actions was actually fairly significant. That was the last engagement. Yeah, I mean, look how many regiments we destroyed. 5,000 plus 6,400 prisoners. So, yeah, I mean, that is a pretty substantial victory. Russian national morale sitting at 94. We're at 97%. That's really good. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to look through the reports, drill into some of the detail, and I think next time I join you, the date will be the same turn. I'm not going to pass turn. It'll be late September 52. So yeah, I can provide more structured feedback. We can look a little bit more into the reports and develop. We'll actually develop our moves based on that, not making kind of rash, excitable. We have to do this. We have to immediately march to Sofia, and yeah, we can develop some kind of analysis and a plan, really, based on that detail. So thanks for watching this video. It is a little bit longer than some others. Occasionally I'll do a video where we get to pass turn and get to kind of anticipate the outcome of the turn together. And in most cases I'll probably just kind of feature a video per turn. But in this case I didn't really want to have to wait to find out what happened at Plevna. A little bit disappointing, but maybe my expectations were a little bit too high. The idea of destroying the entire Russian army was the anticipation of doing that was too great, but it hasn't come to pass. So total victory postponed. But yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.